The city can be just as merciless as the wilderness. In a frozen alley in Denver, where snow buries the forgotten, a wounded German shepherd lay inside a dumpster, barely breathing in the cold. Most people would have walked past without ever knowing he was there. But one man stopped when he heard a faint cry beneath the winter wind. Even on the edge of death, the dog refused to release the small metal badge clenched between his teeth. As if he knew it mattered more than his own life, what this loyal animal was guarding would soon uncover a hidden crime. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes, it arrives on 4 wounded legs. Before we begin this unforgettable story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If stories like this move you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Cold wind pushed snow through the narrow alleys of Denver, turning the city's forgotten corners into silent white tunnels, where only distant traffic and the scrape of drifting ice disturbed the night. Daniel Carter had walked through this alley many times, but tonight the place felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the snow itself were holding its breath. The alley ran behind a row of old brick buildings in downtown Denver, their walls darkened by decades of winter storms and exhaust smoke. Snow piled against rusted dumpsters and frozen trash bags, forming small white hills that muffled every sound. Daniel Carter was a man shaped by years of heat, smoke, and responsibility. At 42, the former firefighter carried the solid, square-shouldered build of someone who had spent half his life hauling hoses through burning buildings. His jaw was sharp and weathered, framed by a short beard speckled with early gray. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow, one of the few visible souvenirs from a warehouse fire 12 years earlier. His dark hair, cut short and practical, peeked out from beneath a wool cap dusted with snow. There had been a time when Daniel moved through danger without hesitation, but everything changed the night the apartment building collapsed during a rescue operation. 3 civilians survived because of him, but one of his crew did not. Since then, Daniel carried a quiet heaviness inside him. He had left the fire department a year later, telling everyone he simply wanted a quieter life. The truth was more complicated. Now he worked long shifts repairing heating systems across Denver's older neighborhoods. It wasn't heroic work, but it paid the bills, and sometimes, on good days, it helped him sleep at night. Tonight had been another long shift. Daniel stuffed his hands deeper into the pockets of his thick work coat as he cut through the alley toward his truck parked on the next street. Snow crunched under his boots in slow, steady rhythm. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost dismissed it. A soft, broken whine. Daniel stopped. The wind carried the sound again, thin and trembling, like a breath fighting through pain. He turned his head slowly. "Hello?" he muttered to the empty alley, his voice clouding into white vapor. For a moment, nothing answered except the wind. Then the sound came again. A weak cry. Daniel's brow tightened. He followed the sound to a large metal dumpster half buried in snow near the alley wall. One of the lids hung crooked, frozen at an angle where the ice had built up along the hinges. The whining came from inside. Daniel's instincts, those old instincts that never truly left him, kicked in immediately. He stepped forward and grabbed the icy lid. It resisted at first. Then, with a metallic groan, it lifted. What Daniel saw inside froze him where he stood. A large German shepherd lay buried among torn trash bags and discarded cardboard. Snow had drifted inside the dumpster, covering parts of the dog's body like a cold blanket. The animal's thick coat, once probably deep black and tan, was matted with dirt, blood, and frozen slush. The dog was barely moving. Its ribs rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. One of its hind legs lay twisted beneath it at an unnatural angle, and dark patches of dried blood clung to the fur along its shoulder. For a long moment, Daniel simply stared. Then the dog opened its eyes. They were amber-colored, cloudy with pain but still sharp with awareness. The animal did not growl. It did not bark. It simply looked at him. There was something haunting in that gaze, not fear, not aggression, but a strange, stubborn will to endure. Daniel felt a tight pressure build in his chest. "Easy, buddy," he murmured softly. The dog tried to move. It failed. A faint whimper escaped its throat. Daniel climbed onto the metal edge and carefully pushed aside the trash around the animal. As he did, he noticed something strange. The dog's jaw was clenched tightly around something, a small metal object. Daniel leaned closer. The object was attached to a leather strap that looked like part of a collar. Despite the pain and exhaustion, the German Shepherd held it firmly between its teeth, refusing to let it fall. Hey, it's okay," Daniel whispered. The dog's breathing trembled harder now, but it still did not release the object. Even like this, wounded, freezing, abandoned, the animal was guarding it. Daniel had seen loyalty before. Firehouse dogs, rescue dogs, police canines. But this was different. This was desperation. Daniel carefully slid one arm beneath the dog's chest and another under its hindquarters. The German Shepherd was heavier than he expected, nearly 70 pounds even in its weakened state. As Daniel lifted the dog from the dumpster, the animal let out a low cry of pain. "Yeah, I know," Daniel said quietly. "Hang on." Snow swirled around them as he climbed down. For a moment he simply stood there in the alley, holding the injured dog against his chest, while the wind pushed flakes across the ground. The dog's head rested against Daniel's arm, but its jaws remained locked around the metal tag. Daniel looked down at it again. It wasn't an ordinary tag. It looked thicker, industrial, almost like a security badge. "What were you doing out here, huh?" Daniel murmured. The dog's breathing slowed slightly, as if recognizing the warmth of another living body. Daniel turned toward the mouth of the alley where his truck waited. "All right," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." Behind them, the snow continued falling, slow covering the open dumpster once more. But Daniel didn't see it. He was too focused on the strange weight in his arms, and the feeling that this dog had been trying very hard not to die. And not just for itself. Daniel Carter's truck engine growled softly as warm air began filling the cab, melting the snow that clung to his coat and boots. The injured German Shepherd lay stretched across the passenger seat, its large body trembling from pain and exhaustion, yet its jaw remained stubbornly clenched around the metal object attached to the worn leather strap. Even in weakness, the animal's instincts held firm, as if some silent command still echoed in its mind. Daniel kept glancing over while driving through the snowy streets of Denver, his rough hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The dog's breathing sounded uneven, shallow at times, but steady enough to keep hope alive. Up close, Daniel could see the animal more clearly now. The shepherd looked to be around 5 or 6 years old, with strong bones beneath its thick coat and a wide, intelligent skull typical of working-line German shepherds. Despite the blood matted along its shoulder and flank, the dog still carried the unmistakable dignity of a trained animal. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" Daniel murmured quietly, his voice softer than the wind brushing the windshield. "Not ready to quit yet." The dog shifted slightly, letting out a low, pained whine. Daniel noticed scars along the animal's side that didn't look new old marks, thin and pale beneath the fur, the kind that suggested the dog had lived a hard life long before tonight. Yet the eyes, amber and alert even through pain, watched Daniel carefully, as if measuring his intentions. There was intelligence there, discipline, loyalty. Daniel had seen similar expressions in rescue dogs that worked with firefighters during disaster responses. Within 10 minutes, the truck pulled into the parking lot of Front Range Veterinary Clinic, a modest brick building tucked between a pharmacy and a laundromat. The clinic lights were still on despite the late hour. Daniel rushed to the passenger door and carefully lifted the German Shepherd into his arms again. The dog was heavy and stiff, but it did not resist. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the parking lot lights as Daniel pushed through the glass door. Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm air. A woman looked up from the reception desk. Dr. Emily Rhodes was in her mid-30s, tall and slender with pale skin and straight auburn hair tied into a loose ponytail. Her face carried a calm seriousness shaped by years of treating injured animals. She had gentle green eyes and a quiet patience that made nervous pets trust her quickly. Emily had grown up on a ranch in northern Colorado, where caring for animals was not a job, but a way of life. "Oh my God," she said softly as she saw the dog. Daniel laid the German Shepherd carefully onto the examination table. "Found him in a dumpster behind Larimer Street. He's hurt bad." Emily moved quickly, but calmly, her hands skilled and confident as she examined the wounds. She checked the dog's pulse, the leg injury, the cuts along its side. The shepherd winced, but did not snap or growl. "Strong dog," Emily murmured. "Most animals would panic in this condition." Then she noticed something else. The metal object still clenched in the dog's teeth. "That's strange," she said, leaning closer. Daniel nodded slowly. "He hasn't let go of it once." Emily carefully studied the tag without trying to remove it. The piece looked thick and industrial, not like a pet tag at all. The surface was scratched, but a faint engraving remained visible beneath the grime. Emily wiped part of it with gauze. 3 letters slowly appeared. A-U-R. She looked up at Daniel with curiosity. "That doesn't look like a pet tag," she said quietly. Daniel felt a faint chill run through him that had nothing to do with the winter outside. And for the first time that night, he realized the dog in front of them might not just be a victim, it might be guarding something important. Morning light crept slowly through the frosted windows of Front Range Veterinary Clinic, turning the snow outside into a pale silver glow. Inside the quiet examination room, the injured German Shepherd rested on a padded recovery bed, while a heating lamp cast gentle warmth over its battered body. Daniel Carter sat nearby on a metal chair, elbows on his knees, watching the animal breathe. The night had stretched long, and fatigue pulled at his eyes, but something about the dog kept him alert. Perhaps it was the stubborn grip it still held on that metal badge, even after sedation had eased its pain. Dr. Emily Rhodes had finished stabilizing the shepherd's injuries shortly before sunrise. The dog had a fractured hind leg, several deep bruises, and cuts that suggested blunt force rather than an accident. Yet, its pulse remained strong. "He's tougher than he looks," Emily had said earlier while adjusting the IV line. Now the dog slept, though its jaw remained clamped firmly around the object like a soldier refusing to surrender a final duty. Daniel leaned closer and studied the badge again. Under better light, the engraving was clearer now. The letters A-U-R sat above a faded line of numbers. Emily had carefully cleaned the surface earlier without trying to force the dog to release it. "That's not a pet tag," she had said. "It looks like a security badge." The idea had lingered in Daniel's mind ever since. With quiet curiosity, he pulled out his phone and typed the letters into a search engine. Several results appeared almost immediately. One of them caught his attention. Aurora Industrial Logistics Complex, a cluster of large warehouses on the outskirts of Denver, known for shipping and storage operations that ran day and night. Daniel frowned slightly. He clicked another result, a local news article from 3 days earlier. The headline read, "Security Guard Missing at Aurora Warehouse Facility." Daniel's heartbeat slowed as he read further. The missing guard's name was Mark Sullivan. The article described him as a 48-year-old security officer who had worked at the facility for nearly a decade. A photograph accompanied the story. Mark Sullivan had a broad face and rugged features shaped by years of outdoor work. His hair was short and sandy blonde, beginning to thin near the temples. A thick mustache framed his upper lip, and deep lines around his eyes suggested the weathered patience of someone who had spent many nights alone guarding quiet buildings. According to the article, Mark had once served in the Army before settling into private security work, a job that suited his calm, disciplined nature. But the detail that made Daniel's stomach tighten was the line beneath the photo. "Last seen leaving his shift with his K9 partner." Daniel looked slowly toward the injured German Shepherd sleeping under the lamp. The dog stirred slightly, its amber eyes opening for a brief moment. Something about the animal's posture, the strength still present beneath its injuries, made a realization settle in Daniel's mind like falling snow. "This isn't a stray," he murmured quietly. Emily stepped closer, curiosity in her expression. "What did you find?" Daniel turned the phone toward her and pointed at the photograph of Mark Sullivan. Emily's eyes shifted from the screen to the dog on the table. The resemblance in posture and size was unmistakable. "His canine partner," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. If the missing guard had disappeared from that warehouse, then the dog lying here might be the only witness left. Daniel carefully examined the security badge again. On the back edge of the metal plate, he noticed something else he had missed earlier: a tiny slot. With careful fingers, he slid his thumbnail against it. A miniature storage chip slipped halfway out from inside the badge casing. Emily blinked in surprise. "Is that a memory chip?" Daniel inserted it into his phone using a small adapter from his work bag. A single video file appeared. When he opened it, grainy nighttime footage filled the screen. The camera angle looked like it had been recorded from a chest-mounted device. Inside a dim warehouse, several men moved heavy wooden crates across the floor. Their voices were tense, hurried. And at the edge of the frame, standing alert beside the camera's owner, the same German Shepherd appeared, loyal, watchful, guarding its partner. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. Whatever had happened in that warehouse, the dog beside him had seen it. The snow outside Denver had begun to thin by late afternoon, leaving gray slush along the streets as Daniel Carter drove toward the Denver Police Department with the small memory chip sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. Rex lay across the back seat of his truck, wrapped in a blanket Dr. Emily Rhodes had insisted he use. The German Shepherd was awake now, though weak, his amber eyes quietly watching the passing city through the window. Every so often, the dog shifted his injured leg with a faint grunt, but the stubborn alertness in his gaze had returned. Daniel noticed the way Rex lifted his head whenever the truck slowed near industrial buildings, as if the scent of something familiar drifted through the cold air. At the police station, Daniel was directed to an office on the second floor where Detective Lisa Moreno waited. Moreno was a woman in her early 40s with a tall, athletic frame and confident posture shaped by years of field work. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and sharp brown eyes studied people with quiet intensity. A faint scar curved along her jawline, a reminder of a robbery case years earlier when a suspect had fought back during an arrest. That experience had hardened her patience but sharpened her instincts. Among fellow detectives, she had a reputation for listening more than speaking, but when she made a decision, she rarely hesitated. Moreno watched silently as Daniel explained everything: the alley, the injured dog, the security badge, and finally the video file recorded inside the warehouse. She leaned forward as the footage played on the monitor. The room was quiet except for the muffled voices of men in the grainy video dragging crates across the concrete floor. "Where did you say you found the dog?" Moreno asked. "Dumpster behind Larimer Street," Daniel replied. Half frozen, Moreno studied the frame where Rex stood beside the unseen camera holder. The dog's posture was rigid, professional. "That's a trained security canine," she said. "Which means if this is Mark Sullivan's partner, the dog saw everything." Within an hour, a small team assembled. One of the officers, Sergeant Paul Hargrove, was a heavy-set man in his early 50s with a thick salt-and-pepper mustache and tired blue eyes that had watched too many crime scenes over 2 decades. Hargrove spoke little but carried a calm authority that younger officers trusted. When Moreno explained the situation, he simply nodded once. "Let's go see that warehouse." Because Rex had already begun recovering and remained unusually calm, Emily allowed Daniel to bring him along in the patrol vehicle. They arrived at the Aurora Industrial Logistics Complex just before sunset. The warehouses stretched across the snowy plain like silent concrete giants, their metal walls glowing faintly under the fading light. As soon as Daniel opened the truck door, Rex stirred. The German Shepherd stepped down carefully, favoring his injured leg, but standing tall despite the pain. Moreno clipped a leash to his collar while officers scanned the area. For a moment, the dog simply sniffed the wind. Then, suddenly, his ears snapped forward. A deep bark tore from his chest. Rex pulled sharply toward the far end of the warehouse. "Easy," Daniel called, but the dog continued dragging them across the icy pavement until he reached the rear wall of the building. There he stopped. He began barking again, short, urgent bursts. Moreno frowned and signaled the officers to check the wall. At first it looked like ordinary sheet metal, but Hargrove's flashlight caught a thin seam along the panel. "Hidden door," he muttered. With a sharp pull, the panel slid open. Inside was a narrow storage room stacked with sealed crates and shipping containers. Several boxes had already been opened, revealing rows of unregistered electronics and sealed packages that looked suspiciously like smuggled pharmaceuticals. Moreno exhaled slowly. "Well," she said quietly, "looks like your dog just found us a crime scene." Daniel glanced down at Rex, who stood rigid beside him, watching the room as if remembering something. For the first time since the alley, Daniel understood something clearly. Rex had not just survived. He had been trying to lead someone back here. Spring sunlight spread gently across Denver's city park, melting the last thin patches of snow that had clung stubbornly to the grass for months. The air carried the soft scent of damp earth and new leaves, a quiet promise that winter had finally loosened its grip on the city. For Daniel Carter, the change in season felt strangely symbolic, as if the long, frozen chapter of the past few months had finally reached its end. The investigation that began with a wounded dog in a dumpster had grown into something far larger than Daniel ever imagined. After the hidden room in the Aurora warehouse was discovered, Detective Lisa Moreno and Sergeant Paul Hargrove led a wider operation that unfolded quickly. Evidence from the secret storage area connected several shipping companies to a sophisticated smuggling network moving illegal pharmaceuticals and stolen electronics across state lines. Within days, police secured arrest warrants and coordinated a late-night raid across multiple locations tied to the operation. The man identified as the network's organizer was Victor Hale, a tall, sharp-faced businessman in his early 50s who had built a respectable public reputation as a logistics entrepreneur. Hale had the polished appearance of a corporate executive, silver-streaked hair combed neatly back, tailored suits, and a calm voice that rarely rose above a polite tone. Yet beneath that controlled exterior lived a calculating mind that had quietly constructed the smuggling ring over several years. According to investigators, Hale carefully hid his operations behind legitimate warehouse contracts and transport routes, believing no one would ever uncover the truth. What Hale had not anticipated was a dog. Rex had been the loyal K-9 partner of Mark Sullivan, the missing security guard who had discovered suspicious shipments inside the warehouse weeks earlier. When Sullivan attempted to report the activity, Hale's men confronted him. Though Sullivan disappeared during the confrontation, Rex had escaped with the security badge containing the hidden recording chip Mark used to document the evidence. Injured and hunted, the dog had somehow survived long enough to reach Denver's streets before collapsing in the dumpster where Daniel found him. The recording Rex carried became the final piece investigators needed. Combined with the crates discovered in the hidden room, the video footage led directly to Hale and several accomplices. Within weeks, the entire network was dismantled, and multiple arrests were made. Through it all, Rex slowly recovered under the care of Dr. Emily Rhodes. The fractures healed well, and the deep bruises faded with time. What surprised Emily most was the dog's temperament. Despite everything Rex had endured, violence, abandonment, injury, he remained calm, intelligent, and quietly loyal. "He was trained well," Emily once told Daniel. "Dogs like him don't forget the people who protect them." By the time spring arrived, Rex had regained his strength completely. His thick black and tan coat shone again in the sunlight, and the cautious stiffness in his injured leg had nearly disappeared. One bright afternoon, Daniel walked beside him through the wide green fields of Washington Park. Children rode bicycles nearby, while joggers passed along the paved paths. Rex trotted beside Daniel with the confident stride of a working dog finally at peace. Daniel stopped near a quiet patch of grass and unclipped the leash. Rex looked back at him for a moment, as if asking permission. "Go on," Daniel said with a small smile. The German Shepherd burst forward across the grass, powerful and graceful, his tail swinging high in the warm wind. Daniel watched him run. Months earlier, that same dog had been lying half dead in a frozen dumpster. Now he looked like he belonged exactly where he was. Rex eventually returned, panting happily, and sat beside Daniel with quiet pride. Daniel scratched behind the dog's ears. "Well," he murmured, "looks like you found your way home after all." Rex leaned gently against his leg, and this time, neither of them had to face the world alone. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or bright light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a wounded dog refusing to give up, or a stranger who decides to stop and care. In the cold alley of Denver, when Daniel Carter lifted Rex from that frozen dumpster, it may have seemed like a simple act of kindness, but perhaps it was something more. Perhaps it was one of those quiet moments where God gently guides two broken lives toward each other. Rex survived when the world had nearly abandoned him. Daniel found purpose again after carrying the weight of loss for so long. And through that small meeting in a snowy alley, truth was revealed, justice was served, and a loyal heart finally found a home. Stories like this remind us that God often works through ordinary people and small decisions. A moment of compassion can change an entire life, sometimes many lives. In our everyday world, we may pass by strangers, animals, or moments that seem unimportant. But what if one small act of kindness is the very thing God places in our path? What if helping someone, even when no one is watching, becomes the beginning of a miracle we cannot yet see? If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to do something kind for someone. Whether it's helping a person in need, rescuing an animal, or simply offering encouragement to someone who feels alone. The world becomes brighter through these small acts of love. And if you believe that kindness still matters, please share this story so more people can see it. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or what part of this story moved you the most. Your words help build a community of people who believe in compassion, loyalty, and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story about the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. And wherever you are in the world today, may God watch over you, protect your family, and fill your life with peace, strength, and unexpected miracles.